Paul, let's begin with this, path out of COVID. I know there's some scepticism about it. It's something, albeit without timeframes. The key element is going to not just be what the health experts decide here, but what the political leaders are willing to have in terms of risk appetite, how they'll treat COVID going forward.
That's right, Tom. I mean, the key thing about this roadmap is that it depends ultimately on goodwill between the federal government, between the Prime Minister and the Premiers, and a willingness to accept the medical advice. Now, given the history of the last 6 or 9 months, you would have to be extremely optimistic to think that that goodwill will exist and that political cohesion will exist. And I think this is the real difficulty. Scott Morrison's made a very significant concession to get up this national roadmap, saying that he would cut international arrivals by 50%. So that's a big win for the Labor Premiers. But at the end of the day, the real issue here is the vaccination rate. Everything depends on the rate of vaccination. And the threshold there will determine the extent to which we move from one phase to another of the roadmap. And that, of course, means the extent to which restrictions are being opened up. For the Prime Minister. And the big question, of course, is whether that goodwill exists or whether at the end of the day, the Premiers are going to demonstrate that they really call the shots.
The interesting part about that as well is you can look at the landscape and say, well, look at the popularity of lockdowns in WA and Queensland for now. It doesn't mean it lasts forever. And once we get vaccinations rates up, at some point, there will be pressure on premiers to say no more lockdowns and even to look forward on international borders. It's not a question of if, it's just a question of when, surely.
Tom, look, this is completely correct. In fact, I've written about this in my column for the Australian tomorrow. The metric is going to change. At the moment, the metric is the speed of the rollout. And of course, Australia is doing badly there. But at the end of the day, the metric will become the extent of coverage. The metric will become the extent of vaccination in this country. Is it 70%, 75%, 85%? And if Australia's overall coverage is superior to that of the United States or a number of other industrialised countries, then that will be a win for Australia and a win for the Morrison government. So the metric is going to change. I think the real issue here in political terms for the Prime Minister is how much damage is going to be done to him and his standing over the next 3 months.
Basically, it feels like right now the referendum might basically be on the vaccine rollout for all that's happened. We'll see. There's a while to play out. Just finally, Julia Banks. Paul, what's your view? Does this need to be addressed in a more, I guess just a bigger way by Scott Morrison? We've heard comments from his office so far, but does he need to go further?
Well, I think it does need to be addressed, but it seems to me, Tom, it needs to be addressed by Julia Banks. This is a very significant accusation of sexual harassment by one politician or one ex-politician against another politician. For all we know, that minister might still be in the government today. And this is not an accusation by a staffer against a politician. And I think given the gravity of the accusation itself, it shouldn't be left here on the table. I think it's very unsatisfactory to have this just being left as an anonymous accusation. Who is the person involved? How serious is this? It is serious, and if it is serious, then it ought to be pursued. It ought to be pursued through some form of inquiry or some form of current inquiry, such as the work being done by Kate Jennings. But I think it's very unsatisfactory if Julia Banks's position is, oh, well, I'm putting this on the record now 3 years later, but I'm not going to name anybody. I'm not going to pursue it. I don't want an inquiry. I really think that is not a satisfactory way of dealing with these issues.